Hello, this is John Greiner with Basin Safety Training and Consulting. Today we're going to be covering noise exposure, hearing conservation, and fatigue management. What's unique and interesting about these topics is they are directly related to decisions we make as employees regarding our safety in the field. Our employers may be able to give us some direction regarding type of hearing protection and when it needs to be worn, but really it is our decision to and our onus to determine if it's the correct amount of hearing protection, and we're going to give you some tools to be able to determine that. Also, we're going to be covering fatigue management, which is really, once again, a decision-based safety tool that you have to make as an individual to determine whether or not you are safely engaging in work. So, a few objectives here. First of all, we want to learn how hearing is lost, how to avoid hearing loss, what PPE is going to protect the worker, understanding fatigue factors and impacts, and lastly, how to safeguard against fatigue. So hearing conservation really is protecting the hearing that you already have. As you age, no matter who you are, you're going to be losing some hearing. It's a part of life. It's a part of what happens to us as we get older. But work and even play can affect how our hearing loss progresses and whether or not we speed that up. So obviously, it's an important part of a job. And as an employer or supervisor, manager, and being in that team, it is your job also to make sure your guys have the proper amount of hearing protection and it's available to them at all times. So a little basic, kind of biology lesson here about how hearing works. Many of you probably already know this, but sound enters the ear, obviously through the ear canal, causes the eardrum to vibrate. Those vibrations then move through the ossicles and into the cochlea, and the cells inside the cochlea move and bend, and that's really essentially what transmits that neural connection into interpretable sounds for us as humans. And it all happens obviously in milliseconds. So what happens when we lose our hearing is those nerves inside of our inner ear are damaged or flattened, similar to a blade of grass on a field. And if you imagine, a car driving or a bicycle driving across grass versus a car versus, a dozer, a John Deere 750 dozer, then there's a difference, and on the impact it's going to have to those blades of grass. Same thing in hearing. If you're dealing with a drill, minimal hearing, minimal impact to those nerves. If you're working with a jackhammer, or if you're working with a large piece of equipment, or next to an air compressor, or even driving a truck, with the window down for long periods of time, there's also a duration impact, how long you're exposed to certain frequencies or hertz, decibels. Hearing is lost when those cells are damaged. Essentially, it's running through there, as you can see here, in a circular motion, damaging the nerves as we go. And that's typically if you're at a concert or shoot a gun, you hear that ringing in your ears. That's your body telling you, hey, you you're hurting your hearing here, and maybe you need to make a different decision in the future about what types of sounds you're allowing to listen to. So obviously there's different types of hertz and frequencies, and then those have a relative relationship to decibels. And that information that we're hearing is going to be measured typically, like I said, in hertz. Those vibrations are measured in hertz. So the rapidity of those vibrations, it has an impact, but also the loudness. And then, what we can hear as far as hertz goes depends on, and this is, when you're talking about dog whistles, we're measuring that in hertz. So bats here are really showing us at over 20,000 hertz they can interpret. That they can also use it for sonar to visually see. For human beings, from 20 to 20,000, that's kind of our max, and then under 20, elephants can hear, which is interesting. That's why they get the kind of the spooked type thing. And some people would even say that hertz and energy are kind of connected, so that animals are essentially hearing frequencies and energy that are being given out by people. It's a little bit out there, but just that's kind of some of the concepts that are existing. So decibels is how we measure impact of sound, not necessarily the vibration frequency, but more so the impact, the pounding onto our bodies. An airplane taking off, like I said, a jackhammer going, things like that. That's how we measure it. So this is a picture of a dosimeter, which is essentially what we use to determine the sound levels, and it's a pretty good tool. If you don't have one of these bad boys, you can actually get one on a phone. It's an app you mine's called Decibel X. It's a couple bucks, and it'll give you readouts and printouts gunshots. And you can measure, hey, this backhoe, let's get up to the engine. What's the decibel reading there? An arc welder, an air compressor, and you can get those readings. So as far as us as individuals go, we have thresholds of safety for our hearing so that damage doesn't occur. Typically, that number of decibels is right at 80 decibels. That's where we, throughout an 8-hour period, will incur hearing damage. And like I said, that damage, and if you, going back to the field metaphor, once that grass is wrecked, and if you do a lot of trail walking, etc., or heck, if kids are walking across your yard, or like cutting a corner if you're on a corner lot, that grass does not grow back. It needs to be reseeded. Well, fortunately, you can reseed grass. They don't have the technology yet to reseed, nerves inside of our inner ear. Therefore, once it's damaged, it's not coming back. And 80 decibels is really where that threshold is, and that's where hearing protection is required per OSHA. So as I said before, employers are required to determine where hearing protection is required. Employees are required to essentially follow suit. Hey, we know we need to wear hearing protection. It's kind of on us to do it. Now, there's different ways to measure your hearing. Some people may say, well, how do we know it was work related and not the guys out the firing range? I was at the firing range last night shooting off, and I had inner ear protection and then over ear protection as well. If I wasn't wearing that, my ears would be ringing today. We shot off about 200 rounds, a lot of fun, government issued, of course. So it's also free, which is great. But what if I was doing that and come to work the next day? It's like, oh man, I got this ringing in my ears. I'm gonna need to get some workman's comp out of this. How do we determine that? And really, the only way as an employer to protect yourself or as a supervisor or manager, measure those decibels, get that information to your people, and then have them act accordingly, as well as supply the hearing protection necessary. So speech is at about 60 decibels. A lawnmower is between 90 and 100, and a rock concert, you're 130 to 140. Gunshots are also in there. That's typically where we're going to have some pain, some ringing in the ears. And obviously at a rock concert, it's going to be a different experience if you're in the back, nosebleed section versus right up by the amps. So, those distance and duration make a huge impact to how it's going to impact us. So noise-induced hearing loss isn't uncommon. We lose frequency capabilities. So, typically older men, they have a harder time hearing babies, for example. And women, young women specifically are tuned to that different frequency. And as we get older, we just kind of lose it. So, if you get older, you want to be able to hear your grandkids talking. You don't want to be that grandpa who's like, "What'd you say, Sonny? What was that?" You don't want to be that guy earlier than necessary. Protecting your hearing is pretty important. So now we're going to talk about hierarchies of hazard controls. Cover this every time. There's definitely going to be questions on the quiz about it. I make no bones at all. Elimination is the first thing you want to do. Now, this can be looped in with engineering controls and substitution. I'd even potentially loop all those together, but this is the true hierarchy. First, you eliminate it. Do we need that equipment? Second, we substitute it. Can we take that equipment away and put something else in there that's not as loud? Thirdly, engineering controls. Are we putting up walls or barriers or enclosing an area that emits a lot of sound? Then we have administrative controls, as you guys know from previous messages, signage, things like that, that we can post around, hearing protection required, 80 decibels, 90 decibels, 95 decibels, whatever the loudness that we determine. And then lastly is PPE. And, in this case, PPE, it's typically the first thing we go to. Well, just get some earplugs. It's like, yeah, that'll work, but we still have the hazard that we got to deal with. So the goal is obviously to implement those other four from a hierarchical perspective prior to selecting the PPE that we need. So as I mentioned, elimination. Can we shut off equipment while people are working? Can we move that air compressor outside of the shop rather than it being inside of the shop? Things like that. Those are eliminating methods of protecting people. Substitution, another option here. Can we substitute the equipment with less noisy equipment? Taking fuel source generators or equipment and changing that to electrical equipment that typically is quieter, or even plastic gears, etc., versus metal gears. Little small things like that can make a difference. As I mentioned, enclosing hazards, changing the way a piece of equipment works using mufflers or baffles, sound dampening equipment, or insulators. These are methods of engineering out the hazard or protecting people around the area, but once again, this is after elimination. Lastly here, of actual protective and strategic methods is administrative controls. High noise area, we're hearing protection here, and I typically recommend putting another sign, or it doesn't have to be fancy, but saying 85 decibels, 90 decibels, 95 decibels, kind of reminding guys, hey, 80 is where you need it, we're at 95, that means where you're hearing protection. And then obviously training people what that means. And very lastly, if all those things can't be eliminated and we still have, areas of high levels of noise, then we have to wear hearing protection. And then 80 decibels too, just to clarify and make sure we're all on the same page, is over an 8-hour period. So for example, if you clap your hands loudly, that can get up to 100 decibels, so, my skeptics out there may say, hey man, well, might just feel like clapping today. Should I put in my hearing protection? No, obviously, Gary, you don't need that, but definitely if you're going to be around that level all day or more than 8 hours, or in that case, 2 hours, then yes, you will need to wear your hearing protection. So there's different types. There's foam, which you can see in the top picture. On the second picture there, you can see the rubber, and these are the reusable types. If you're going to consistently be wearing these, I recommend just, hey, don't be a waster. Just get some of those, some rubber ones. They can get nasty though, so some guys don't like that. They just like the throwaway method, and I'll leave that up to you and your company to determine what type you want to get. Earplugs are good. This is how to insert them. So you're going to reach over if you want to. I mean, depending on what's most comfortable for you, this is one method. You want to open up that ear canal through pulling it, rolling the earplug in if it's a foam type, putting it in, and then it will expand into your ear. That's the best method there's YouTube videos on this that you can watch. I may even put a link here in the video for you to be able to click if you'd like. So this, I don't know who put this picture in here, but this can. If you don't clean out your ears, you probably want to do that before you wear this stuff. But if not, then this is a good example of why you want to use reusable ones. Earmuffs can and should typically be used in conjunction with ear plugs, and they're go over the ear. They can be clipped onto hard hats, just depending on what type of work that you're doing. Sometimes they'll even have radio communication devices inside. I think here at our store we sell those, so there's different methods and types out there depending on what type of work you're doing and what type of communication you need to have while you're using the hearing protection. All right, so we're going to talk about the noise reduction rating, otherwise known as NRR. PPE, obviously, for this, each type of hearing protection is going to have a rating, just like any sort of protection method that's blocking, whether it's fluid or a filter or anything like that. It's going to have some value associated with it. The interesting thing with hearing protection is that this number is not to be trusted implicitly. You actually have to do a calculation. That calculation is half or 50% of the amount of decibels that you're protecting against. So for example, here I have two numbers on the screen, 12 and 26. If I'm at 89 decibels, for example, I do my measurement, 89 decibels, you'd say, oh, well, I can be around 80 decibels for an 8-hour period. Throw a 12 on there, this protects me to 92 decibels. I'm good for 8 hours. Heck, I'm probably even good for 12 hours. Fact is that it's not strictly accurate. That number has to be half because that 12 is split between both ears. So it's actually covering you for 86 decibels and would not cover your essentially would not protect you for that period of time. For a shorter period of time, but not for an entire 8 hours. So at 26 decibel, once again, that's splitting that in half, that's gonna be 13 decibels. So then you'd be up there around 93 decibels of protection. That would cover you for 8 hours and you'd be squared away. So it's a little bit complicated. I don't know why they made it that way. Write your congressman. Maybe they'll make a change. Something tells me they won't, but hey, maybe it'll make you feel better about yourself. So, look at that number anytime you're wearing hearing protection alongside your dosimeter reading. Like I said, if your company is cheap and doesn't have one or hasn't done it, you can download the app and pay a couple bucks. There's also free ones. Mine was $3 because I have like the printout feature where I can like name each reading, and this is the Cat, 550. This is the air compressor. This is the my girlfriend screaming at me. It's put that down, print out the report, put it up on the wall. She's gonna love that. Things like that, for example. Or your wife. Maybe you get yelled at more by your wife. I mean, my wife doesn't yell at me as much as my girlfriend. No, that's a joke. That is a joke. So, all right. So PPE, earplugs, and earmuffs. So, like I said, you do want to use them both in conjunction. It's very common, not a bad way to go. It's difficult to hear people, and that's a complaint. So, if you need to be able to hear people while having ear protection, you're going to want to purchase the inner ear communication device as well. All right. Well, that pretty much covers it for hearing protection and conservation. Now we're going to move into fatigue management, everybody's favorite topic on the planet. So fatigue management, one of our trainers put this in here: be at your best, get some rest. That trainer, actually, it's kind of ironic. He has sleep deprivation consistently because he suffers from insomnia. So, we kind of joke and laugh about that a little bit. And there's a lot of things that can cause that. And so this is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek topic because every person is different, just the way it is. Every depending on your diet, exercise, your stress levels, just amount of sleep you get, having newborns at home, having children who are sick at home, being sick yourself or having a spouse that's sick. All these things are going to affect how much sleep you get, as well as if you're a night owl versus a morning person. There's a lot of different factors. It's difficult to just jump in and say, oh, this is exactly how you're about to go about get enough rest. You can't just say that. So the reason we go through this training is because, as you probably know, being fatigued or sleep deprived does have an impact on your ability to work safely, on your ability to be able to withstand those longer shifts and go home and get your work done and then get enough rest and then come back to work the next day. How much sleep you get matters as far as mental focus, clarity, etc. So we want to make sure everybody's as safe and as helpful as they can be. And so this is one of those topics, once again, that's challenging because you are your best gauge of whether or not you're fatigued. So the reason this type of training and concept has been developed is really to evaluate how do employees engage in their own health and safety regarding a very important but difficult to pin down area of safety. So obviously fatigue is tiredness, exhaustion. It can be physical or mental. It's a message to the body that you need to get some sleep, and acute lack of sleep or accumulated, quote, sleep debt are things that will affect your level of fatigue. So there's some negative effects, obviously. Inability to see properly. Fogginess, that's pretty extreme, but does happen. Slowed reflexes and reactions, a lot more common, especially, like what? Like someone will say something and it takes you a few seconds to gauge and react. Forgetfulness, micro sleeps, automatic behavior, autopilot. If you've ever been driving for long periods of time, kind of been tired, and after an hour on the road or something, you just kind of snap out of it and say, whoa, I don't remember the last hour on the road. I don't remember going through that town. Things like that can happen and should be safeguarded against, especially if you're driving for work. So effects, kind of mentioned this, wise decisions or plans, strategies can be impacted. Solving problems, maintaining concentration, decrease in alertness, awareness, watchfulness. Hey, you're not paying attention as well because there's been incidents or there's been lack of sleep and incidents happen. And then obviously inability to remember recent actions or observations, as I mentioned. The Prudhoe Bay disaster of, I think it was 1982, 1983, was a result of fatigued workers and guys who were overworked, lots of hours, responsible to be on point and alert for long periods of time, and they weren't. And the result was, a tanker who was going the wrong way and didn't have anyone to direct him correctly. So some other effects, mistakes are going to be increased, inability to respond efficiently, inability to communicate effectively, decreased ability to handle stress appropriately, which is personally how I'm most affected by stress usually, or fatigue. Dramatic mood swings, giddiness, depression, elation, irritability, impatience, boredom, restlessness, and grouchiness. All these different things have an impact. So behaviors that you can see, those are the effects on a person, and then those effects are going to have behavioral impacts. These types of individuals are typically more often sick or absent, resign from positions more frequently, and cause or cause people to be involved in more accidents. So some other behaviors work related. They work slower, they're not as reliable, and they avoid complex and difficult tasks. And they are down to stay in the background because they kind of recognize their inability to tackle projects as they should. So some causes, I mentioned a few, but there's some more. Individual health and stress levels. If you're really stressed out at home, if there's some family problems, kid problems, death in the family, things that stress you out, keep you awake at night, that's going to obviously cause sleep deprivation. A poor safety culture. And typically, that kind of goes with the next three: scheduling, project type and length, and workplace conditions, kind of looping all those together. If you're working 18-hour shifts and getting 6 hours off, it's difficult to get 8 hours of sleep in 6 hours. You know what I mean? And if you have laundry to do, cooking to do, you got to go out and get a bite to eat. You want to have a beer after work like a normal human being. Those things are all going to eat into your ability to sleep as much as you need to. So, maybe you sleep 2 hours one night, 4 hours the next night. Eventually, that's going to catch up to you. Also, project type and length. I'm a big fan of giving a day a week off to everybody at least. That's not always possible, depending on what you're doing. So, if you're working 7 days a week for 4 weeks, 28 days, that has an impact. And usually companies that do that, the guys have them take a month off or a few weeks off, but some companies do not, and then that can be a really big challenge. Workplace conditions, once again, just weather, having to walk through the mud, lots of loud noises, etc. Those sorts of things can also cause additional fatigue. So scheduling, another big issue here. How long is your shift? Do you have a fixed schedule, shift rotation? What are your days off? How long are you allowed to adjust for your shift change? Swing shifts, working nights and then days for 3 days, nights for 4 days, things like that can also affect fatigue. And I'm sure if I asked everybody who's watching this, who's experienced this, there'd be a lot of hands in the air because it is a terrible situation. So scheduling is another big deal. We obviously want to appeal to needs and preferences of our people and solicit that information. Hey, man, you look tired. What's going on? Especially as manager and supervisors, giving people sufficient breaks and recovery time, giving people adequate travel time, and factoring that into their day, and then also any time zone changes that they may experience. Two types of project length and types and lengths I want to go over. Some things can impact you if you have boring or repetitive tasks. Complex or mentally challenging tasks can both add to fatigue. I was on an Air Force base recently, and talking to the guys at the gate guard position. The guys at the gate guarding for months, every day, 8 hours a day, 24/7, 10 hours a day, depending on. You can look in their eyes and be like, man, this guy's tired. Those sorts of things make an impact, and we want to get guys kind of working a little bit more, a little bit better. Switching it up a little bit so that they can have at least a mental break. And then same thing for something that's complex. Guys that are doing hard cleaning, guys that are doing hydrovac work, things like that, it makes a big difference. So workplace conditions also make a difference here. They can increase the negative effects of fatigue. We talked about weather, and then also homesickness, and I'm going to briefly touch on that. This gets a little bit into the psychology of work, but guys or gals who are away from home for long periods of time, have a mortgage and a family back in another state, working in North Dakota or Montana, that has an impact, and it's one that you shouldn't just brush off, because in the oil patch, especially, it's easy to say, oh, I'll be honest with you. If a guy came up to me and said, hey man, I'm homesick, and I'm tired because of it, and I'm not going to come into work today, my initial reaction, just as a human being, and just because of my training in the oil field, would be like, okay, somebody's lazy, and that's kind of your first thing. But at the same time, we have to realistically assess the fact that there's bigger things involved in a worker's capability than just is the job hard. Those home factors also play a role. Talked about workplace conditions a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and pop past that one real quick. Some different things we can do to reduce fatigue, however, using equipment that's ergonomically friendly, lifting equipment, anti-fatigue mats, things like that, ergonomic chairs, and energy drinks and caffeine, while they can be helpful for short bursts of time, over time, they actually start having a diminishing effect, and they're not helping you as much as they're over. So health and stress is another thing I mentioned a little bit. You know, if you're sick, if you have some health conditions, high blood pressure, etc., these things will affect your ability to get enough rest or for your body to feel rested, even if you're getting enough sleep. Diabetes and hypertension, and then short-term things such as cold and allergies can also affect you. Then medications, prescription, etc., over the counter even can affect you. Medical treatments that you're existing or that you're experiencing, and then obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, insomnia and other sleep disorders can have an impact on your level of fatigue. Talked about stress a little bit before. The next few slides we're going to be dealing with that. Detrimental effects on a person for stress go well beyond fatigue, but definitely this is an area that can affect you. It can be related to issues at home and work. There's emotional stress, mental stress, physical stress, and health, kind of all combined together. You know, if you got guys that are going through a lot at home, even at work, whenever there's conflicts, etc., these things can have an impact. Stress is, some people think that stress is the #1 killer in America. It's been linked to a lot of different cancers, even. Disorders, gout, things like that, diabetes, a lot of things can be impacted or exacerbated by stress, and that's obviously caused by things at home, things at work, just personal things that are going on. And my recommendation to anyone who's watching this, if you really feel like you're having stress that's pushing you to make poor decisions or not be safe at work, talk to somebody. The longer you hold on to that stuff and don't deal with it, it's a little bit like a rotten fish scenario, like day one, you throw it in the corner, no big deal. Eventually, everyone's going to be able to smell that, and maybe you just get used to it. You're like, I don't smell anything, but the guy walking in, it's like the cat lady people, they may not smell that 50 cats in their house, but you come over, you're like, man, I got to get out of here. I can't hang. So stress is a little bit like that. It can kind of hang on you, hover over you, and eventually impact you in a negative way. Talking about the Air Force, a lot of suicides in the Air Force, guys not necessarily talking to people about issues they have, and it has an impact. So definitely get someone to talk to. In North Dakota, there's not a lot of options. There are online options now, though, that are fantastic, app-based people you can talk to over the phone, text message, and just say, hey, I'm struggling. Can you help me work through this? Can you pray for me, etc.? Those sorts of things make a big difference. So some other symptoms, physical symptoms, you have chest pain, headaches, indigestion. Obviously, substance abuse can happen, weight changes, mental health, and sleep disorders are all impact of health, stress, and other issues. So the reason I go into that psychology, just because human beings are human beings. Sometimes in safety, it gets a little bit robotic, like meet more, you do safe operations task standard, and it's like, okay, great, but people are people. And so some things we can do as individuals, especially supervisors and managers, focusing on the safety culture at work and helping our guys be safe. So obviously not rewarding productivity over health and safety is a big issue. If you're giving bonuses because guys work, so many hours during a paycheck, which we kind of do with overtime, so that's another thing entirely, but it's something we gotta be careful of. Fatigue management, talking about it, saying, hey guys, if you're tired, you can come to me. I understand. Positive job performance reviews and evaluations, kind of focusing on what people are doing well. Sometimes if people aren't sure if they're doing good, they're going to push and work those extra shifts and do this to kind of feel like they're doing a good job. So sometimes working with individuals that let them know they're doing a good job can actually have a big impact. And obviously, once again, kind of related to point number 1 here, not incentivizing behaviors that contribute to fatigue. I believe in efficiency. It is the #1 most important impact to cash flow. However, efficiency that drives employees to be not healthy is not efficiency at all. It's actually counterproductive. Lastly, not penalizing workers who need to rest due to fatigue or essentially letting them getting in trouble. That's a big issue. Workers must be encouraged to report fatigue or lack of mental focus to supervisors. And lastly, supervisors, taking appropriate action to prevent loss and fatigue. That's for you supervisors and managers out there, working with your guys, and for the rest of you employees, speaking to your supervisors when you have issues. And if they don't feel, you don't feel like they're understanding where you're coming from, really try to walk them through it. Take them, hey, look, this has been the impact. I'm concerned that I'm at this point and A, B, and C will happen. So kind of leave you with this as employees. If you feel like you're not capable, and whether it's a personal thing or a work thing, doesn't matter, of doing your job in a safe manner where people are relying on you to do your job safely, and you not doing it safely will impact their ability to go home safe. That is a responsibility that you have to your company, to yourself, to your family, and to the families of the guys that work with you. So just want to make sure you're thinking that way, being on point with your safety and health, being honest and internally about anything that's impacting your ability to work safely. So thank you very much for tuning in this month. Next month, looking forward to sharing with you again, and have a great day, as well as over-ear protection. Talk briefly about ear caps, or canal caps as they call them, but they are not as effective as a method.